Hey everyone, I am definitely back, at least for now. Now, here I'm going to do a little rant that is unscripted, something I usually don't do because I kind of suck at it. But the issue is, I have a lot of longer videos that I want to get out, and I want to get them out as soon as possible. But that is a long process, so I wanted to just put something out ahead of time so we can have some real content on the channel again. So, it has been one hell of a year. Now, right off the bat, I want to say I do not want to turn this into a war channel or a military analysis channel or even a history channel, even though I've talked about this before. The thing is, I never really wanted this to be a very serious channel in the first place, and you can see that if you look through my back catalog, which you absolutely should. Chances are, if you're following me, you already know about other YouTubers like Perun or Laserpig or Adam Something, all of whom have done some really good analysis on this war. And of course, I do some serious war posting with my Twitter account. That's at Spaghetti Kozak. But beyond that, the only real unique insight that I could give that you wouldn't find from half a dozen sources online right now is pretty much limited to stuff that I can't really talk about. With that being said, I would like to make a little bit of commentary on what's going on right now on the front and maybe clear up some confusion. So, what we've been hearing ever since the failed winter counteroffensive of the Russian side is we've been hearing a lot about the upcoming Ukrainian counteroffensive. Some people have even gone so far as to call it a spring counteroffensive. I don't know why. I don't know anyone official who said it would be a spring counteroffensive. There were certainly implications, but you have to take certain official statements with a grain of salt. A lot of this is kind of designed to just keep the Russians on their toes. But there's this palpable idea that the counteroffensive is going to break at any moment. And then depending on who you're hearing from, there's a lot of talk about what the counteroffensive will mean. Will it be successful or not? And what will be the outcome of that success or failure? Now, what special insight do I have from my position that I can actually talk about? The answer is pretty much none. However, I think I could provide some insight just based on my experience from last year, and I think a lot of people are forgetting what it was like this same time last year. In the first unit that I actually served with, the first unit that I actually served in combat with as well, when I got to it, it was about early May, and so we were still in this process of preparing. We were getting a lot of new recruits, civilians coming in, and they needed training and everything, and we were basically just moving around this one oblast I won't name, getting prepared to actually go to the front. And of course, there was a lot of speculation, and at that time, right around June, things were not going so well in Donetsk Oblast and Luhansk Oblast. As some of you know, there was sort of a breakthrough there, and this eventually led to the fall of Severodonetsk. So there was a question of would we get rerouted to Severodonetsk, that we would get rerouted basically to Donbass in general. And but there was also this other rumor that had been going around since I had arrived in the unit that we would be sent south. There was talk about an advance on Kherson. And eventually, when we did deploy, we were sent south. And when we first went into action, it was in Kherson Oblast. So based on what our commanders were telling us at the time, we had this idea that this is part of that coming offensive. We were told that after the objectives that we had seized, we would continue basically going town to town until we got to a certain town, which I won't name. That town was actually liberated much later in the year. What actually happened, though, was that our entire company was taken off the line, and we went back to our base north of Kherson Oblast. And we never really got a good explanation as to why. And then as time went on, I think myself and a lot of people started to wonder, where is this Kherson offensive that everyone is expecting? And of course, you know that when this kind of thing is being telegraphed and it doesn't materialize, then of course you get all the pro-Russia sources and all the Putin fanboys are out there saying, "Ha, where is this vaunted Kherson counteroffensive you promised?" The longer it went on, the more mockery you would have about how Ukraine can't take this territory back. And I remember hearing in July rumors about some counteroffensive in Kharkiv Oblast. And at that time, keep in mind, this is about a month before it actually it was more than a month before that Kharkiv counteroffensive. At the time, it sounded kind of far-fetched to me, the idea that Ukraine would be launching two major counteroffensives at that time, just because of lack of resources, right? And also so much had been said about Kherson Oblast, there had been so much focusing on that. It just seemed that launching two big counteroffensives on two axes seemed a little bit far-fetched. And so, lo and behold, in the end, it turned out that the first big counteroffensive was in Kharkiv. And I was actually a participant in that. That's what I actually did through most of my service there so far. And then, of course, a Kherson counteroffensive really got started in earnest, and Kherson was liberated. So what can we learn from all this? Well, remember, back in May, there was a big buzz about a major counteroffensive to retake Kherson, okay? And then we didn't get any counteroffensive at all until September. So when it comes to this counteroffensive, you have to remember that, for one thing, Ukraine has acquired a lot of equipment and weapons that we didn't have back then. If we had had them back then, who knows, this war might almost be over by now. I'm talking about Bradleys, I'm talking about Martyrs, Challenger 2s, Leopard 2s, that kind of thing. So you have to remember that all these shiny new weapons have to be integrated into their units, whether those are new units or integrated into older existing units. And based on that, basically the counteroffensive will be launched when it's ready. That is, when those units are prepared. Now, before that, we may see weeks or even a few months of basically prepping operations, prepping the battle space. That's going to be things like long-range strikes on ammo depots, barracks, command and control, that sort of thing. You will see probably limited offensive actions that are just designed to get advantageous positions before launching something bigger. We're kind of already seeing something like this going on around Bakhmut right now, where the Russians are basically not only stopped dead, but they're already starting to retreat. And if you pay attention to Russian channels, they are in something of a panic right now. I don't really see a major counteroffensive going through Bakhmut, though. So again, it's just shaping the battle space for the future counteroffensive. Now, I could be totally wrong about what I'm about to say, but I would expect the counteroffensive to be later than sooner, just because they want to be fully prepared, because they want to have all those weapons fully integrated so that they can maximize their advantage. Now, on that note, I want to talk about the other, let's say, counteroffensive discourse that is really starting to grind my gears. It's this idea that, let's say, certain sources have been really trying to kind of put a damper and manage people's expectations and say, this isn't going to end the war, and, oh, it could be a big problem if it doesn't go well because the West might cut supplies or something like that. Folks, no one expects the counteroffensive to just simply end the war. By that same token, contrary to people who get their understanding of war from Paradox Interactive strategy games, Russia actually doesn't have endless human resources to throw at this war. Like, the raw numbers of men are there, but you got to remember they have to be trained, they have to be equipped, they need to be fed, they need to be housed somewhere. You know, this isn't like Command and Conquer where you click on the barracks and just churn out a bunch of guys for 100 credits or whatever. And this is a big issue right now because basically Russia's best troops, Spetsnaz, VDV, naval infantry, they are pretty much spent. They have been devastated. Again, can they replenish ranks? Sure, but that's going to be fresh people with no experienced people to train them, and they're unlikely to get much training now. So, based on the fact that Ukraine is going to be counterattacking with a lot of very advanced weapon systems that were not available to it the previous year in those two counteroffensives, my basic tentative prediction is this, is that you are going to see significant gains. You're probably going to see a lot of territory liberated, at least a few major cities. And what you're going to see is it's going to put Russia in a very untenable position. And that's what I will say for now. Because here's the thing, pretty much ever since last summer, that was the last time Russia really was able to capture some significant ground, and they did so by spending a lot of lives, a lot of vehicles, and basically only because they were able to concentrate so much artillery into such a small area, and they focused just on that area. They completely revised all their fantasies about the Donbass cauldron and everything, and the pinchers started to get smaller and smaller and smaller until they focused on this one little area. Now, HIMARS and similar systems pretty much put a stop to that kind of momentum. And since then, pretty much all we've seen from the Russian side is that slow, inexorable advance towards Bakhmut. And again, this is based on concentrating as much combat power as they can to take this one city, which is not a very large city at all. I've actually been there. And even there, throughout the, 9 or 10 months at this point that they spent trying to take this territory, they suffered some major reversals, and they had to give up some territory at times due to some counterattack. Since then, it has just been this very slow, bloody slog to take over Bakhmut. They never managed to cut off the Ukrainian troops fighting there, and now we're already seeing these local tactical counteroffensives by Ukrainian troops, and they're making gains that Russia spent, in some cases, months and thousands of lives to get. This is just not sustainable. So from this point on, wherever the counteroffensive ends up, the Russians will be in this untenable position. Basically, the Russian military has utterly embarrassed itself. So far, there has been, among Russia's propagandists and fanboys, especially among people who just never really looked at the map, there have been various coping strategies, and the last coping strategy they had was to say, haha, what's going on in Bakhmut? And it's like, look, buddy, you're not even getting Bakhmut after tens of thousands of casualties. You couldn't even take something that's like the 54th or 56th largest city in Ukraine. I stand to be corrected on that if I'm wrong. But the point is they can't even take that. I'll tell you something else. They can't even take Avdiivka. Avdiivka was basically right on the front doorstep of their puppet state that they established in 2014. It was a city that they were shelling every day well after Minsk II. I was there myself. I actually experienced this. They couldn't take it. They couldn't cut it off. It's basically like a suburb of Donetsk, the city. And they couldn't even do that. And by the way, this is why I think a lot of these people wringing their hands about the Ukrainian counteroffensive and saying like, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to get the results it needs, and Western support may flag as a result. I just want, why is it every time Russia takes a street in Bakhmut, the same people, or at least it seems like the same people, are acting like, oh no, Western support has failed, Ukraine's about to lose Bakhmut, and it's just an utter disaster. And then you have the Russian army that has failed counteroffensives across the entire front line, basically, like in January, February of this year. And all they could manage with all the concentration of force there around Bakhmut, all they could manage was this slow, steady slog. I shouldn't say steady because, like I said, there were reversals earlier. But all they could do is this basic sluggish move through Bakhmut, losing tens of thousands of soldiers in the process. I think someone actually pointed out that it would have taken a snail less time to get across Bakhmut than the Russians did. An actual literal snail, okay? And when they do that, we get all these videos about, oh no, the Wagner's taking Bakhmut, oh, Ukraine is suffering irreplaceable losses, the casualty ratios aren't as favorable anymore, and they're in danger of getting cut off. Did they get cut off? No. Has Russia actually managed to take the town? No. So, the question I have is, a lot of times when we think of who is winning a war, if there is a country that wages war on its neighbor with the intention of annexing certain territory, if not overthrowing the government, and yes, the Russians did actually mean to go into Kyiv and replace the government with a puppet government, generally when we see that in something like that in history, and that aggressor country is failing, and they're failing to take more territory, and then they get fought to a standstill, and then they lose a bunch of territory, and then they just can't make any significant operational gains anywhere. Normally, we would call that losing. There's an old saying about insurgencies, which is that basically insurgents don't have to win, they just have to not lose, and that's based on the idea that if a foreign country, or usually a foreign country or an invader or whatever, if they want to take over a territory and control it, they're the ones that shoulder the burden of, first of all, taking over the country, taking the territory, providing security, basically showing they can manage the territory, and whether they're trying to annex it or create a protectorate or occupy it or whatever, like, that burden is on them. And if there was an ongoing insurgency in this country and they were failing and they were losing large swaths of the countryside, as what happened in several historical insurgencies, then we would say that country has a problem, that they are failing. And of course, this is not really insurgent warfare. This is, in many cases, very conventional. And Russia is clearly unable to impose its will on Ukraine. They have been fought to a standstill and are facing major reversals, and they will face more reversals in the future. But for some reason, with a lot of our pundits, Ukraine's situation is always on the edge of a knife, and if the Russians actually manage to take a street somewhere in Bakhmut, then suddenly this is doom. So I would just say, pay attention to who is saying these things now. Look at what they were saying about the situation earlier, because I really have a feeling you're going to see two things. First of all, if the counteroffensive comes later, as I suspect it will, you're going to see those people mocking Ukraine or just doing the whole concern trolling thing if they're like a certain German Bild journalist, some of you may know. The sort of concern trolling thing where it's like, well, where's the counteroffensive? Oh no, it must have been deemed unfeasible. If they're more pro-Russia leaning, they're going to be mocking the idea of the counteroffensive. They're going to say, haha, where is this vaunted counteroffensive you promised us? They will probably say that right up until the day that Ukrainian forces punch through Russian lines, just like they did back in Kharkiv last year. But also keep paying attention to what they say as the counteroffensive goes on, because I guarantee you that no matter how successful it is, they are going to say something like, okay, well, they got Melitopol, but they didn't get to Mariupol yet, or they didn't get to Berdyansk, or, okay, they took all of that, but they didn't get into Crimea yet, or they didn't retake Luhansk Oblast. Like, you're going to find all these totally good faith concerns or criticisms about the conduct of the counteroffensive, and it'll just tell you who's worth listening to on this topic, really. And I guarantee you some of those people, and I'm talking mostly about the pro-Russia side, many of them are going to have to basically reach for the ultimate cope reserve. They're going to have to say something like, well, your counteroffensive did not completely liberate every last inch of Ukrainian soil, so just wait. Next winter, Russia will launch that counteroffensive, the one that they had promised us this winter in the beginning of 2023. And that'll reverse everything, and they'll be right back at the gates of Kiev, and Zelensky will flee, and the West will cut off arms and everything. It's all just nonsense, but it never ceases to amaze me how these people make these predictions constantly, and they are constantly proven unequivocally, indisputably wrong, and they will continue making predictions. And worse still, you will still see those people doing media and doing interviews and being asked for comment. And the good news is I think we're reaching a point where basically Russia's failure is going to be so undeniable that a lot of these people are going to end up getting permanently discredited. And I very much look forward to that day. Anyway, so that is just my thought about the counteroffensive and some of the chatter that's been going on about it. As I said, I think it's going to be later. I think it's almost going to be as if the Ukrainian armed forces are actually waiting for a critical mass of critics, concerned trolls, and Russian propagandists to once again start mocking the very idea that Ukraine will be retaking any territory, and then it's going to happen. And it's going to be devastating for them. All right, even if it doesn't end the war, it is going to be devastating. I am quite confident about that. And that is just based on what we saw last year and knowing what we have now that we didn't have back then. Anyway, so I wanted this to be a short video. It actually turned out to be much longer than I expected. I have a script for a longer one and thankfully funnier one coming up. And that's likely going to be my last video about the war for a long time, because as I said before, I didn't make this channel to be about that. I mean, this basically consumes my entire life, so obviously I want some sort of outlet. And so long as I have a platform like this, I might as well just put some of my thoughts out there. So I welcome your questions and comments in the comment section. As always, you can find me on Patreon. Link is in the description. And of course, you can always like and subscribe and all that, and definitely share the videos. And please, share the videos that aren't war related. I'm sure there's something in there for almost anybody, because I got to get that revenue back up. Otherwise, I'm going to have to convert this entire channel into looking at upcoming movie and video game trailers and complaining that they're woke. It's the only thing that reliably makes money on this platform, apparently. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for my upcoming videos. I also recommend you head over to Dylan Burns' channel if you want to see the two-part interview with myself, but also just see all the great stuff that he's been doing in Ukraine since last year. I've been really impressed by it. Anyway, that's all from me, so stay tuned for that next video. Take care.